You are here to capitulate. Don't worry, we won't annihilate your people. We are not barbarians. After all, that was probably not the start of a successful negotiation. Prime Minister Sola of the small Blue Star Federation was facing a difficult situation. Archon Helmini of the Galani hierarchy stared at him from the main view screen, her image projected larger than life on the bridge of the mud. The Galani were not bloodthirsty by nature, but they thought in rigid hierarchies that had ultimately led to the war between the two powers, a war that the Federation, despite its numerical inferiority and lack of martial tradition, had conducted surprisingly well. Unfortunately, not well enough. Sola had to travel to the negotiation aboard a heavy cruiser. The Federation's flagship had already been destroyed months ago, and not even a single undamaged battleship was available. The Galani hierarchy had no such problem. Archon Helmeni had arrived in an impressive double battleship, a class reserved for top-level commanders, twice the size of a normal capital ship. Helmeni's screen was adjusted so that Prime Minister Sola saw her from a slightly lower angle, a perspective the Galani loved to emphasize their power. Sola observed his counterpart carefully. Her clothing was conservative, but a few daring cuts revealed patches of green skin. It gave her dominance not only a note of power, but also of eroticism. That was typical for high-ranking Galani women. They regarded their sexuality as just another resource for exercising power. Is that a good way to live? Sola wondered. Wrong question. That doesn't matter now. Focus on the negotiation. Archon Helmeni, we are willing to negotiate, but we have made it clear that we will not surrender unconditionally. We want to end the bloodshed and open a path that leads to a glorious future for both our peoples. What do you say? Helmeni leaned forward slightly and bared her teeth, a sign that she instinctively perceived Sola's statement as a threat to her authority. Then Sola saw her take a deep breath and slowly lean back into her seat. Sola had studied the culture of all major neighbors of the Federation in detail at the Diplomatic Academy, including that of the Galani. He recognized the signs. Helmeni was trying to suppress the natural instincts of her species. The Federation has undoubtedly fought well. The ambush at Acheron 3 was a masterpiece of modern space warfare. Almost our entire Golden Fleet was wiped out. Likewise, the attack by your so-called Ghost Fleet on the main supply depot at Tal Manati. Tactically brilliant, even if despicably bold. Helmeni leaned back. She stared at Sola intently and took a deep breath, a sign that she was trying to suppress her power instincts and connect with her rational side. Apparently, she managed to give compassion priority over instinct. Her confident posture became somewhat softer, more relaxed. Perhaps there was still hope for this negotiation, Sola thought, or at least for a way out with dignity. I would say the Federation has earned a healthy amount of respect within the hierarchy. We suffered higher losses than we expected. She paused briefly, then added in a calm voice, but the end result is the same, is it not? We now outnumber you 3-1 in terms of equipment and soldiers. We are only one jump away from attacking the Federation's seat of government, the Blue Star system, and you speak of peace treaties. Prime Minister, doesn't that ignore the military facts in the room? The hierarchy wants clear power structures. With itself above and us below, we accept that we cannot defeat the Galani. We are willing to discuss alliances or benevolent vassalage, but our freedom is sacred to us. Can you allow us to preserve our culture and our dignity? As a reward for our courage and our honor, Sola had activated the right diplomatic and cultural levers. He had signaled submission, drawn a reasonable line, and appealed to the recognition of dignity and honor. The Galani were obsessed with power structures, but they were not without respect. Even those at the top of a hierarchy could not completely humiliate their subordinates, at least not as long as those subordinates were not slaves. Helmeni answered in a surprising cordial manner. I have, in fact, proposed to my superiors that the Federation be considered as vassals, or perhaps even as allies. But they have other ideas. Your resistance has brought you much honor and admiration in military circles, but some of the highest ranks in the hierarchy feel personally insulted by your defiance. In this matter, my hands are tied. I see potential in you, but others don't want a relationship. They want submission and revenge. I have been ordered to achieve that outcome, one way or another, either through fire or a boot on your neck. I am sorry, Prime Minister Sola. Only your capitulation can prevent further harm. I give you my word of honor that I will treat you well, within the limits of my authority. Sola saw this as the breakdown of the negotiation, and although he had gained genuine respect for Helmeni as a person during this conversation, both he and she knew that it was by no means certain that she would be given command of the occupation forces. So he had to play his final card. I didn't want to do this, Helmeni, but the Galani hierarchy leaves me no choice. Helmeni raised an eyebrow. Don't do anything reckless. Sola, my escort outnumbers yours 10-1, she warned calmly. Send the signal. Red alert to the fleet. Helmeni ordered immediately. Signal sent. Prime Minister, confirmed Admiral Dovak, one of the last surviving old admirals of the Federation. May I ask who the recipient is? You'll see in a moment. Dovak, Federation ships are not moving to engage. They are not combat-ready. One of Helmany's adjutants reported in confusion. Helmany raised one of her well-trimmed eyebrows. What is this? Sola, a hyperspace gate is opening. Between us and the Federation fleet. Sola looked at Helmany and dropped the submissive posture he had previously used to appeal to her. He stood upright and took a deep breath. Oh, ancestor gods! Sola heard several of Helmany's crew members whisper. What is it? Helmany barked at her subordinates without losing her composure. It's a progenitor void arc. A pause followed. They've summoned the humans. Sola turned to a secondary screen. There he saw it. Emerging from the blue flashing hyperspace gate. The humans' void arc. A cylindrical object, dark gray, blue lights everywhere. No visible propulsion, and yet it moved through space as if by its own will. A ship said to possess the firepower of an entire fleet, at least that's what they said. Sola had never seen it in action, neither personally nor in recordings. And he was glad about that. The humans were the first. The progenitor species of the universe. A mystery, a threat, a friend, gods, and yet, among us, wise, reclusive. The list could go on. The fact was, he had succeeded in convincing them of the necessity of their presence here, and that alone had already been a victory. Now, a new piece had appeared on the board. One the Galani could not simply overpower. Helmany looked at him, and her entire expression practically screamed, "You madman!" But, was there something else? Perhaps a flicker of admiration for what he had accomplished. Sola could hear panicked voices and officers chattering on the bridge of Helmany's flagship. Even behind him, on the Mudrell S bridge, low whispers and excited voices could be heard. He even saw two officers embracing each other with tears in their eyes. Admiral Dovak did not reprimand them. Surely, the nerves of all Federation soldiers and officers were stretched thin, or one might say, desperately thin these days. Silence. Helmany's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Instantly, on both ships, every voice fell silent. Instinctively, Sola gave her a nod of respect. She was, after all, a formidable Galani, true to the values of her people, even in the face of the godlike progenitors. You are an absolute madman, Sola. For the second time, Helmany skipped the formal prime minister. Still, Sola didn't feel insulted. This had indeed been an insane move. But he had no other cards left to play. Then she leaned back and visibly lowered her eyes for a moment, a gesture of respect and submission among the Galani. But I can't help but acknowledge that you are a worthy opponent, she continued, and your connections reach far deeper than the hierarchy assumed. You left us no other choice, Sola replied, now having shed all pretense of submissiveness from his tone and posture. The hierarchy at least. With you Ark and Helmany, I might have found an acceptable solution. But not with your masters. Helmany shifted slightly in her seat. She likely agreed, but voicing criticism of one's superiors was utterly unacceptable within the hierarchy. While she considered her response, a voice called out from the side. The Void Ark. Its lights are pulsing in a sort of rhythm. Incoming data. Sola heard similar calls from Helmany's ship. Both of them were receiving a message from the progenitors. Dovak gestured to him using a series of standard military signals. Sola wasn't a soldier, but he knew the basics. They had received some kind of invitation. He looked at Helmany, who turned toward him. Her posture and expression were a complex mix of submission, fear, tension, and there it was again. She bared her teeth. It seems we will soon meet again for a second round of negotiations. Prime Minister Sola, don't celebrate your victory just yet. This is not over. The progenitors are never friends to us lesser species. They are always the parents, the masters, and, for some, the gods. The comlink was severed. The screen went dark. The screen was dark, but Helmany couldn't help but stare at it for another second. Lost in thought, she quickly pulled herself together and motioned with one hand for Captain Fell of the Galdan, her personal double battleship, and her personal adjutant Shoni to come forward. She glanced at the screen once more for a second. Captain Fell, prepare a shuttle, an escort, and appropriate gifts from the treasury. Remember, the progenitors hate slaves, so no living gifts. When all is prepared, I will have to go to the progenitor Void Ark myself. There was no response. Immediately, Helmany snapped her head around and looked Captain Fell in the eyes. He did not lower his gaze. A clear challenge. She bared her teeth and slowly straightened up in the command chair. All her muscles tensed, and her gaze locked onto the captain's. After a few moments, Captain Fell lowered his eyes. I will ready the shuttle and the gifts, Archon, and inform my superiors. I am your superior, Fell. Helmany hissed. You owe me your submission. Fell nodded and left the command chair with a gesture of obedience, though he did perform the gesture with a slight casual attitude. Helmany had been so hyper-focused on Fell's challenge that she hadn't even noticed her adjutant Shoni standing beside him. She looked into Shoni's eyes. Will you challenge me as well? Shoni lowered his gaze. No, Mistress Ark, my loyalty and gratitude are not so fickle. You are my patron, come what may. Helmany studied him for a few more seconds. Shoni spoke and carried himself with precision. Helmini said quietly. Look me in the eyes, Shoni, and relaxed her muscles. She felt exhausted, drained on a mental level. Shoni understood that she wanted to speak with him not as a superior, but as a friend, a helper, a family member. She showed a measure of vulnerability. In Galani culture, a sign of great trust. He lowered his gaze once more, extra deep, to signal submission and respect before meeting her eyes, as she had asked. He had beautiful light blue eyes. Helmini spoke softly. Due to the intimacy of the moment, the other crew members nearby, and because she felt so tired. This is a catastrophe. This morning I told the High Archon that this negotiation was a chance to achieve victory without further resistance or losses. And now, we are very far from victory. I would even say that the kind of victory the High Archon and the High Council desire, the subjugation and occupation of the Federation, is no longer possible. Shoni finished her sentence. Helmini looked at him, horrified. I am no master of psychoanalyzing the progenitors, but from everything I know, they have always been outspoken opponents of conquest and subjugation. In their eyes, all races are their children, and no child should enslave another. This morning, the endpoints of this war were total victory after a month of war and losses, or total victory through negotiation. Now both options seem out of reach. Now the only question is whether they will become our vassals, our allies, or, in the worst case, whether we will withdraw and return everything we have conquered from them. Perhaps even pay reparations. If that's true, my career is over. I might even be executed. That much was clear to Helmini. Or punished worse than execution, Shoni said, leaning forward and speaking very quietly. Helmini barely whispered the words as her stomach twisted. Demotion. Shoni nodded, though he was too respectful to repeat it to her. For a moment, Helmini felt so nauseous that the bridge around her began to spin. Demotion, degradation, public humiliation. She felt panic rising inside her. Suddenly she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Shoni's hand. That was bold of Shoni, to touch her, given the difference in their ranks, but she was grateful for it. It pulled her out of her spiral of despair. As my adjutant, you'll likely fall with me. The carrion birds are already circling, said Helmini as she looked in Captain Fell's direction. I'd like to avoid that, said Shoni. Helmini turned back to him abruptly. If you want to distance yourself from me before that, that's not what I meant. Mistress Archon. Shoni lowered his gaze for a moment again, signaling gratitude. How about we frame the situation to our superiors as a complete catastrophe, and then try to gain merit by turning a total disaster into a smaller one? Helmini understood immediately. We say that, through the treachery of the Federation, it is now possible that we will be forced by order of the progenitors to completely withdraw. But I, Helmini, who fights heroically for the hierarchy, will try to negotiate so that at least the Federation becomes our vassal through diplomacy. Is that what you mean? Shoni nodded with a smile. Depending on the outcome of the negotiations, what will happen to us? Shoni thought briefly. If the Federation becomes our vassal, I believe your position and career will be secure. Our superiors will, no matter what they say behind closed doors, publicly praise your diplomatic success in order to save face and 1T execute you. Or worse, blame will be put on the Federation and the progenitors. Helmini nodded. But if it comes to an alliance, even one led by the hierarchy, then I guarantee know what will happen. We'll probably die. And if there's a withdrawal without any political success at all, then you, Shoni, didn't finish. Helmini completed the sentence in her head. She and her family would be demoted and completely humiliated, stripped of all rank and power, pariahs for at least 10 generations. I'll send the message to the High Archon and the political leadership. Prepare yourself, Shoni, we are going to the progenitors. Shoni nodded, slower than he should have. That wasn't necessarily a sign of rebellion, but Helmini looked at him with surprise. She paused, then she understood. What do you want for your loyalty, Shoni? She asked him. A patron should reward his protege. Shoni began to straighten slowly but steadily. He stepped closer to her, so that she could sense his warmth and smell his scent. His gaze hardened and focused on her. She could feel his masculine aura. You do not have a life partner yet. My family is also respected, with connections and authority. Helmini inhaled his scent through her nose. She evaluated his masculine strength. She looked into his eyes, and he did not look away. Normally, life bonds were arranged among equals, which is why Shoni had to aggressively show off his genes and boast of his family's status to make an impression. I will consider it, and if it doesn't come to pass, I will match you with someone who contributes to your authority. Shoni nodded slowly. I will check if the shuttle is ready. He turned and walked away. Helmini watched him, continuing to assess his manliness, strength, and bearing, which he was aware of, and thus he walked slowly, upright, with tensed muscles. Everyone who saw it knew exactly what was going on here. Helmini was not fundamentally opposed to Shoni's proposal. Even in the best case, her career would likely slow down or stagnate from now on. That made Shoni a realistic option. but it added to her exhaustion to have to juggle this layer of problems on top of the war and the progenitors. Some might criticize Shoni for making a move on her in such a situation, but in truth, it had been the only moment he could have done so. She was at her lowest, vulnerable, in need of loyalty and help. He was at his peak, proven, loyal, capable, and strong. Only in this moment their difference in status was low enough to even suggest it. She would earnestly think about it, but not now. First, she had to compose the message to leadership. After writing the message, she rose from her chair. Shoni nodded to her. The shuttle was ready. An officer reported, "Federation shuttle has launched and is approaching the Void Arc." She gathered all the strength she had left. "We're taking off as well." For the hierarchy, the officers on the bridge saluted. Most did so with the necessary respect for her position. "It is safe, Prime Minister," a bodyguard told him. Sola considered the man a benevolent liar. How safe could one truly be aboard a human Void Arc? They would all be dead the very moment the humans decided they should die. "Thank you, Morel," he said in passing to his bodyguard, and stepped onto the Void Arc. The floor felt like gray stone, a bit like he looked around. The hangar, if one could call it, that was large enough to hold a small fleet. Even Helmini's impressive double dreadnought could fit inside a dozen times over. But that wasn't what fascinated Sola. More interestingly, one of the docking arms held a Federation ship. More precisely, the Resolute Defender, the flagship of the Blue Star Federation fleet, which was impossible. It had been destroyed in a battle months ago, literally blasted to pieces, while heroically covering the retreat of damaged vessels. What did this mean? Had the humans recovered it? But it looked brand new, not like patched-together remains of a wreck. "Prime Minister," a voice called. He turned around. A small feline creature, walking on two legs and about 1 meter tall, approached. It stopped in front of Sala, who stood with Admiral Dovak, his bodyguard, and a few officers. "Hello, Federation being. My parents want me to bring you to them. Come with me." The creature turned around and started walking back the way it had come. Behind him, Sola heard a high-pitched whine and the hiss of oxygen thrusters. He glanced over his shoulder. A Galani shuttle had entered the hangar, slowly heading toward a dock. "Come, Federation being," the little creature called again. Sola turned his eyes away from the shuttle and led the delegation forward. They passed through long, wide corridors, so luxurious they bordered on obscene, at least by average starship standards. But it didn't feel like showing off. It felt like walking through someone's grand, tastefully decorated home. Someone old and powerful. Everything radiated, not power, but memory, as if experience had crystallized into place and object. Admiral Dovak walked beside him. "You look tired." Sola, very tired. The old admiral had a wrinkled face appropriate for his age, but his eyes remained sharp and alert. "Probably because the damned Galani have limited me to maybe 3 to 4 hours of sleep per night these last 3 years. And now I have to give it my all, again with an empty tank. And on top of that, all this dominance posturing from the Galani. It's exhausting. It's absolute madness to build a culture around the who has the biggest balls idea. Why?" Sola cut off his own rant. Dovak touched his arm gently like a grandfather would. "You need a long, good vacation." He paused. "As for the Galani, is it really madness, building a culture the way they have?" Sola was surprised. "What do you mean?" To him, it was obvious. Blue Star, Federation and democracy were good. Galani, with their obsession with power and hierarchy, were Bador, at least deeply dysfunctional. Dovak tried to explain. "The Galani have simply brought into the open what happens behind closed doors in our Federation party donations. Lobbyism, backroom deals after elections. Power among the Galani is no secret. They demonstrate it. They embrace it. They acknowledge that power is part of life and cannot be escaped. Aren't they just like us, only more honest?" Sola still felt deep unease. Clear thinking was difficult in his current state of exhaustion. But somewhere inside, he understood what the Admiral meant. The Federation had its own power structures, and judging the Galani for developing their own might be a greater error than the Galani's obsession with power itself. He was about to argue that the Galani had taken it too far. But then the corridor opened up into a vast chamber so large that the entire Senate building of the Federation could fit inside. The walls were covered in exotic plants. The floor was real soil, a garden, no a biosphere. Easily a kilometer or two in diameter. Inside this massive ship, Sola realized something. They hadn't seen anyone until now. No people, no machines, and certainly no progenitors. Only the little feline creature in its thin robe, leading the way. Suddenly, the creature darted off, down a winding path. The delegation tried to follow, but soon lost sight of it. Round them only green, warmth, and silence. Sola kept following the path. Eventually, it opened into a clearing. There stood a house, a spacious but otherwise ordinary-looking family home, and in its garden stood a progenitor. The small feline creature ran to them and embraced the progenitor, nuzzling against it as its tail wagged happily. Now the creature seemed far more canine than feline. The progenitor petted the being's head with a hand and an arm. both completely covered in fabric that looked like bandages turned into a garment and ending in a glove. But that wasn't the disturbing part, nor was it the heavy robes, which seemed to swallow their arms entirely when they pulled them back. Over its shoulder, one could see something like a metallic neck leading into a round, featureless metal head or helmet, no face, just smooth dark steel. Where eyes would have been, there were only 2 holes, and inside those holes, lightning, blinding white light, a storm of energy. A shiver ran down Sola's spine. That was power. Instinctively, he knew. This was the progenitor. The clothing and the metal were only a shell, but the eyes betrayed what was truly inside. The delegation arranged itself into formation. Sola and Dovak in front, Morel behind him. Officers and adjutants behind that. They approached with dignity. Sola heard a distant, female voice, a layered, echoing tone. You did well. You're a sweet child. Your brother is bringing the other delegation. Once he's here, you can play together. Alone, Mom and Dad need to talk with the guests now. It's important. Do you understand? Yes, Mommy, said the small creature, and ran into the house. The very idea that this thing could be the child of a progenitor was grotesque to Sola. Something else was going on here. The progenitor turned to them and looked Sola straight in the eye. It felt like walking into a wall, crushing, so much so that his knees nearly gave out beneath him. Honored progenitor. Sola began, bowing his head slightly, hand on his chest. He still felt faint. Sarah, was that a progenitor greeting? Sola wondered, head still lowered. That's my name. He raised his gaze. Ah, yes, of course, honored progenitor. Thank you for sharing your name. I am Prime Minister Sola. How should we address you, Sarah? Of course. Progenitor Sarah. Just Sarah, is fine. You look exhausted. Sola, would you like to sit and drink something? Without waiting for an answer, she turned and walked toward a large sitting area in front of the house. Enough for a dozen people to rest. However, it looked more like a casual seating arrangement, not a formal one. Sarah sat down, and one of her arms slipped from her robe to gesture toward the seating. Sola and Dovak sat. The others remained standing, respectfully. A small robot, barely a meter tall, the first they'd seen, came forward, carrying a tray with 2 carafes and glasses. One held water, the other a dark red liquid that looked like juice or wine. Sola really didn't feel well. He might have been dehydrated. Everything was starting to irritate and enrage him. He poured himself water and drank quickly. The progenitor simply sat and watched, which made him even more nervous. Sarah, I wanted to thank you for coming. After our transmissions, I wasn't certain you'd really be here. We didn't speak. You spoke with my husband, Tomas. He should be arriving from the observatory soon. When he and the other delegation are here, we can begin. Ah, I see. My apologies for the mix-up. Just so I don't make a mistake. What is your rank among the progenitors, Tomas and I? Yes, exactly. We are human. Her voice still sent chills down his spine every single time she spoke, but he forced himself to focus and tilted his head. What did she mean by that? That they were civilians? Or that they were mighty progenitors, so far above everything that they simply no longer used titles? I understand, Sola said, without the slightest clue what she actually meant. May I ask you a question? The metallic head gave a small nod, and for a moment, the intensity of the light in her eyes dimmed slightly. The Resolute Defender. The Federation flagship is docked here, a small gift to the Federation. Not as a permanent supply of weapons to become a war party, but as a tribute to the heroic sacrifice of its captain and crew. It takes great courage and deep love to give one's life for others. Admiral Voran would feel honored that his death received such recognition. He said that to— Pardon, what did you say? He said that to— You mean Admiral Voran? Yes, but he's dead. Honored progenitor. He was dead. He lives. We revived him and all crew members who had drifted into space when the ship broke apart, but he must have been dead for weeks, even months. That poses no obstacle to us. Is that— even ethically right? None of them committed suicide, and they were all grateful to live again. They still have the option to end their existence if they prefer to do so. If your heart stopped right now, would you not be thankful if someone saved you from death? Is it right for you to decide that by yourself? Would it be right for you to deny them help based on those feelings of ethical superiority? Answered Sarah, still calm, yet with rising passion in her powerful voice. Sola said nothing. It was too much to process, and he also didn't want to argue with the progenitor. Still, the ethical implications were there. If a progenitor could revive someone, perhaps even weeks after death, would that not be proof of the absence of an afterlife? There were some enormous moral questions here, and yet, he knew, this was only the beginning. Suddenly, they heard noises, and Sola was torn from his thoughts. The officers and Merrill behind him audibly turned around. Another small feline creature, also no taller than a meter and dressed in thin trousers, came running past them and leaped into Sarah's arms. I brought the people, Mommy. You did so well. praised Sarah with all the maternal warmth layered into her strange voice. "Do me a favor and play inside with your sister now. Mommy and Daddy have to speak with the guests." "Yes, Mommy," said the little creature, completely unfazed by the strange voice of its mother, and ran into the house. Sola stood up and turned around. Across the lawn, Helminy approached them. She wore a loose black cloak trimmed with fur over her uniform, which was adorned with medals across her chest. Behind her walked a stately-looking man, presumably her adjutant Tand. Behind him followed a sizable entourage of soldiers, officers, and servants carrying gifts. Probably twice as many people as Sola and his entourage. Helminy met his gaze. Her entire posture, her measured steps, her stony expression, everything radiated power and self-declared importance. These Galani, always so dramatic, thought Sola. But he didn't yet know it would become even more dramatic. As soon as Helminy reached Sarah and turned to her, her entire bearing changed completely. She dropped to her knees and bowed until her nose literally touched the ground, and her entire entourage followed her example. "Great lady, your servant Helminy is here and bows to your power, as is proper." Sarah stood and stepped toward Helminy. Sola and his officers also stood, watching breathlessly as Sarah approached her. How would a progenitor respond to Galani culture? Sarah slowly crouched, and one of her arms reappeared from under the robe, resting on Helminy's shoulder. "Raise your head, Helminy. Look into my eyes." Sola recalled that in Galani culture, there existed a custom where one could invite another to meet their gaze, directly granting permission to set aside the hierarchy for a moment. But here, the invitation was terrifying considering the eyes Helminy would stare into. Helminy hesitated for a moment. Sola thought he saw her shoulders tremble. Then she straightened her upper body and looked into Sarah's eyes. Sola saw fear and awe in Helminy, but also something else. Her expression softened, as if she was seeing something familiar. "Welcome, daughter," said Sarah, and touched her own helmet to Helminy's forehead, clearly meant to signify a kiss. Sola wasn't sure. He hadn't studied the non-essential parts of Galani ritual as closely as the parts he deemed important for diplomacy. But this seemed to be some kind of ceremonial greeting, perhaps that of a stepmother or a higher-ranking woman. Helminy looked slightly shocked and spoke softly. "Thank you, honorable mother." Sarah took Helminy's hand and led her to the seating area, where they sat down together. "Honorable mother, I have brought gifts to express my admiration for you." "Thank you, my daughter. Please place the gifts there on the table. Would you not prefer to examine them in detail? I trust your taste and will look through them later in peace. I feel properly honored by you." That seemed to be an important sentence. Helminy appeared to relax slightly. "I apologize for my delay, but I'm glad that everyone is already here and has made friends." Came the sound of another progenitor voice, this one deeper and masculine, reverberating with layered echoes. Everyone rose. Tomas had arrived. After everyone had greeted Tomas and he had also gone through the ritual of declaring Helminy, his daughter, and her gifts as acceptable, he sat down in a chair. He was slightly taller in stature than Sarah, and the decorations on the front of his robes differed in color and weaving. But aside from that, he had the same metal neck and metal, round, featureless head with the two holes for eyes. With two progenitors present, even if their behavior was friendly, the atmosphere had become quite oppressive. Sola felt as though he were standing before a great mountain, but he decided to give his best in this important moment. He picked up a glass of red juice and drank it. He assumed that the well-informed progenitors would not offer anything that could be harmful to him. He drank the pleasantly refreshing, slightly sweet-tasting beverage and felt invigorated. As he set down the glass, he looked at Helminy and nearly laughed. Helminy was still holding hands with Sarah and looked as he might have imagined her at 5 years old, like a little girl. But perhaps it wasn't fair of him to laugh. It was precisely because of Galani culture that the progenitors had such a strong effect on Helminy. Tomas began. "I want to start by stating what I expect from this negotiation. First, I want all the fabricated public reasons for this war to be left out of the discussion. Did the Federation really attack the outpost on a No, that was a classic false flag operation by the Galani Haas Special Command to create a casus belli. We all know that, and those who didn't know, now you do." Some members of Helminy's entourage seemed surprised, but quickly concealed their reactions. The real reasons for the war, in my view, are 1. The cultural discrepancy between the Federation and the hierarchy. 2. Cosmopolitical rivalry. And to elaborate on point 2, the hierarchy has a demand for core resources which do not exist within its own territory. The hierarchy attempts to secure external access to these resources, which are crucial both militarily and economically, were repeatedly undermined by the Federation. The tariffs imposed by the Federation, as the key trader of these materials, made it difficult for the hierarchy to purchase them. Moreover, the creation of the FAM trade group, together with the Ainen and Manor, formed a structure that can only be described as an alliance for economic warfare against the hierarchy. But the Federation miscalculated, and an economic war turned into a real hot war. The fight with money became a fight with ships, and in that arena, the hierarchy still held the upper hand, given the size of their empire. That was one of the reasons why, from the hierarchy's perspective, this war had to be initiated and won, and from their perspective, that hasn't changed. And yes, the hierarchy started the war with weapons, but the Federation began the war with money long before that. Neither of these can be called morally righteous. That is a fact. The longer Tomas spoke, the more Sola saw Helmini come alive. More and more of her submissive, childlike behavior faded, and she began to sit upright with growing confidence. It was as if she smelled blood after thinking the prey had escaped. Now that this has been said, I also want to make our position clear. We condemn the enslavement of entire peoples, and this war, alongside all the suffering it has already caused, cannot end with all the Adral of the Federation and the smaller races, which are also part of the Federation, being enslaved by the hierarchy. Tomas paused after his monologue and concluded, and now it is up to the Federation and the hierarchy to find a solution to end the war, preferably both wars. Tomas's speech could not be questioned by Sola, as he was a progenitor. In fact, Tomas, by virtue of his authority, had preemptively settled many of the lies and disputes over the assessment of the situation, where normally a struggle for interpretive dominance would have already flared up. He had established an official view of the current situation, and now Sola and Helmini had to work with it. Sola's concentration broke for a moment. He forced himself to refocus. Although Tomas had named, or created, certain facts, an experienced politician, like himself, could surely still find an angle of attack to turn the situation in his favor. Thank you, Progenitor Tomas, Just Tomas. Thank you Tomas for this presentation, and for not missing the fact that the Federation never preemptively resorted to armed force against the hierarchy, and that the reason for war stated by the hierarchy was nothing more than a sham, which only further underlines their barbarism, simply slaughtering their own people just to get resources. Such a government must never gain a foothold in the Federation. I therefore demand that the hierarchy withdraw all their ships and personnel from our space and pay appropriate reparations to the Federation after the damage has been assessed, to at least make up for the material losses. Under these circumstances, we would be willing to sign a peace treaty with the hierarchy and discuss access to resources at a later date. Helmini looked him in the eye. With cold anger, she let go of Sarah's hand. You attacked us first with money. You tried to bring us to our knees. But the hierarchy is no easy prey. The Buddha sometimes tries to swallow a mopic that's too big and chokes on it. There is only one answer to such cowardly, devious attacks. The hierarchy keeps everything it has conquered from the Federation, and the Federation submits to us. Because we have won this conflict fairly, Sola wondered, was Helmini simply proposing an extreme counteroffer to simply oppose him, or was she trying to test the waters and see how far she could go with the progenitors? Or was it just anger? Was she also losing control? Tomas stepped in again. Just a reminder, Archon Helmini, we will not allow the Federation to be enslaved. Your demands go too far. We will stand true to our promise to protect the Federation, as long as it shows cooperation in these negotiations today. Sola immediately understood the implied threat from Tomas. If he was not cooperative, the progenitors would withdraw their promise of protection. Tomas had de facto ordered both Helmini and him not to hope for the best outcome for their respective sides, but to work toward a viable solution. Sola was frustrated. He hadn't expected it to be easy, but the progenitors were less cooperative than he had hoped. Once again, he felt the fatigue creeping in. Helmini used the pause caused by his exhaustion. We would be willing to forego a formal annexation of the Federation and consider a vassal treaty instead. One in which we receive assurance that the Federation grants us access to its resource network without tariffs, and never again takes military action against us. And yes, I understand that the Federation supposedly did not attack militarily, but for our people, it looks like it did. And a humiliation of the leaders of the hierarchy by revealing these details, which go against this narrative, cannot happen. Sola understood. Helmini wanted silence about the true reasons for the war, resources, and a formal submission of the Federation without conquest. But he was not willing to sacrifice the Federation's independence. It seemed to him that Helmini was mostly trying to negotiate with him, but she should not forget that she was also negotiating with the progenitors. They were the real power here, so he played a card not aimed at Helmini, but at the progenitors. What if we combine the peace treaty I proposed with the formal integration of the Galani hierarchy into the FAM trade alliance? That way, they gain participation and access to a vast network of trade and resources. And when we work together, cultural differences can gradually smooth out. And to satisfy their desire for prestige, they will receive the role of speaker for the next 10 years, and we will rename the trade alliance GFAM, with the Galani first in name. That should take the wind out of Helmini's sails, appease the progenitors, and at the same time secure the independence of the Federation. Even if it would partially defuse the trade war against the Galani, and if a name change and prestige is all it takes to end a war and secure the future, he would consider it a bargain. Helmini understood what he was trying to do and looked at him with a stone-cold expression. She had recovered enough to return to her old self, powerful, calculating, and always fighting for control. He had done what he could to exploit her temporary weakness caused by the presence of the progenitors. Tomas looked at Sola. Integrating the hierarchy into the FAM trade alliance would indeed be a good measure to defuse the true cause of the war. Sola already thought himself the victor of the negotiation. But then Tomas said something else. But what about the great cultural dissonance that contributed to the greater psychosocial hostility between the Galani and the Federation? That is not solved by this. Sola understood the signal. That wasn't enough for Tomas yet. Helmini sat there, and her eyes wandered to Tomas. Sola could see how she realized that Sola and Tomas were now negotiating the future without her, because she had failed to grasp the true dynamics of the situation. He saw Helmini take a deep breath. That is indeed not enough. Tomas, would you in my place be satisfied with receiving a seat on a committee whose 3 members have all in the past made decisions 100% against the hierarchy? Wouldn't the future look exactly the same with the committee continuing to vote against the hierarchy? Only this time with 75% of the votes, which is still a viable majority. We Galani refused to rely solely on the FAM as solution for this situation. She looked Sola challengingly in the eyes and bared her teeth. Tomas looked at Helmini. She cast her eyes down, expressing submission. In part, you are right. On the other hand, once you are inside, it is easier to shape politics as a member than as an outsider. But, I am curious. What would you need to receive to be satisfied? The Star Strait of Helman. Ridiculous, Sola interjected. Helmini looked at him, baring her teeth again. You seem to be forgetting that we have already conquered 90% of it. Tomas thought for a moment. The Star Strait leads to the Null Empire, which has resources to sell. A direct trade link for the Galani hierarchy to a source of resources without anyone meddling in between. I think that is a fair proposal, considering they have mostly conquered it anyway. Sola didn't like this one bit. Buying from the Null cheaply and selling it with margins and tariffs had been a solid source of income for the Federation. While he was still considering whether he should resist it or not, Helmini already continued, using the ongoing momentum, and about the problems with culture, ... How about we form an alliance? Let's call it a Commission for Economic and Cultural Cooperation. Not a real military alliance, but a forum in which we can exchange ideas. The hierarchy will receive the chairmanship for the first 20 years. Maximum 10, said Sola. All right, 10. You can't stop striving for power. Helmini, power is the most important thing. Progenitor Sarah, who had remained silent for a long time and had left the lead to Tomas, now spoke up. Her voice filled the room. Her words seemed aimed primarily at Helmini. We humans acquired all the power one could ever wish for a long time ago. And once we had it, we realized it was only a tool, not an answer. All that remained for us from then on was to seek wisdom and love. Then she took Helmini's hand again, who lowered her gaze once more. Tomas resumed the conversation. 1. The hierarchy withdraws from Federation space. With the exception of the Star Strait of Helman, this will be granted to the hierarchy as a means to obtain resources from the Null. 2. Additionally, the Galani will join the FAM, which will be newly formed as G, and for 10 years they will hold the chairmanship. 3. Furthermore, a preliminary stage of an alliance in the form of a Commission for Economic and Cultural Cooperation between the Federation and the hierarchy will be established. The Galani will also hold the chairmanship there for 10 years. 4. As of now, a complete and indefinite ceasefire comes into effect, and thus, the war ends. Both wars. Does everyone agree? Sola calculated whether he could survive this treaty politically, but anything that did not mean submission or vassalage could at this point be considered a victory. He should be able to survive it politically. The opposition would criticize him for the loss of the strategically important Star Strait of Helman, but overall, everyone would know that this was still a very good outcome. Did he want to lose territory? No, but it seemed the progenitors were in favor of the Federation making small territorial concessions. I agree. Helmini sat there, looked him in the eyes. Sola saw complex emotions in her eyes and facial expression. With the expression of a martyr, she bowed before Tomas. I agree on behalf of the hierarchy. However, the final and complete treaty draft must be signed by the High Council of the hierarchy. But I will initiate the withdrawal of our fleets and the takeover of the Star Strait of Helman as soon as the Federation withdraws its remaining forces from there. Admiral Dovak, who had been sitting silently beside Sola as an observer, spoke up. I will make the arrangements as soon as I return to the heavy cruiser Mudroll. Tomas rose slowly, and all the others followed his example. I will send a draft of the treaty based on this agreement to both parties. We will withdraw from this sector. However, as guarantors of this agreement, we will observe the implementation of the treaty and, if necessary, enforce it through various measures. We hope that further human intervention will not be necessary. Go in peace, have peace. Sarah added, "Have peace, beloved children." And so the negotiations ended, and the delegations paid their respects and left through the forest. Sarah stood there motionless, looking after Helmeni, who strode away with pride in her steps. That poor girl, she will be executed, and all who are under her protection as well. I wish we could have done more for her. We tried to put her at ease with the Galani step-parent ritual, but still our effect on her was too big. She regained composure too late to dominate the negotiation. You could have made it easier for her. TOMAZ. It made it hard for the Audro Prime Minister. His mind was hanging by a thread as well. None of them was mentally or physically in good shape. Also, I don't think showing unjust favoritism to the hierarchy or the Federation will help to stabilize this sector. In the end, I tried to level the playing field and guide them towards a sustainable solution, but anything more, and I would have completely dominated the negotiations, which from a guiding force to a dictating one. We are no gods. Yet I feel the responsibility of one from time to time, Sarah mused. Behind Sarah, the sliding door to the house opened. She turned around. There were Tom and Marnie, their two genetically uplifted cat-dog children, peeking out. "Mommy, we are so hungry. We're gonna die of hunger soon." Sarah would have rolled her eyes if she still had eyes and stated, "You two are always so dramatic. Mommy and Daddy will come and cook something nice for you," which was answered with excitedly wagging tails and happy faces. When both delegations were walking away, floor lights lit up to guide them back to the docking area. While Solo was musing why they hadn't used those in the beginning, but had sent the little feline creatures instead, he heard Helmeni boasting loudly behind him. That really bothered them that we got the Helman star straight. No more profits from overpriced resource flows to us. She had said it deliberately, loud enough for Sola to hear, to make sure he would feel humiliated. And somehow, something inside him snapped. He was done with the endless games the Galani played. However, punching Helmeni in the face would only jeopardize the peace treaty, so Sola decided to do it the Galani way. He turned around and looked Helmeni in the eyes. His hands were clenched into fists, and he approached her like a bull, charging its target. "I can speak Galani dominance rituals if I want to, and not just the submissive role," he thought. He stood directly in front of Helmeni, barely 2 hand-widths away, his fists clenched, staring into her eyes. Helmeni seemed confused for a moment and looked at him questioning. "You know what you're doing right now, Prime Minister Sola?" "Absolutely," Sola growled, without breaking eye contact, and internally triumphed over how he was showing this Galani bitch who the real winner was using her own dominance language. Helmeni broke eye contact, which Sola took as a victory. Tilted her head slightly so she could smell the side of Sola's neck, and audibly drew in a breath. Not just once, but twice, 3 times. Then she looked at him with a slightly unfocused expression in her eyes. "I thought you just saw me as a hateful rival. That you, of all people, would show so much compassion trying to save me and my protégés from death. Surprising, but not unwelcome. And looking at it this way, our species do possess general external genetic compatibility." "What are you talking about, you crazy woman?" thought Sola, but maintained eye contact. "I accept your genes and your courting. You're probably the only man in the universe who can help me in this situation." "What is happening?" screamed Sola internally. Her gaze softened for a moment, and she briefly lowered her eyes in the typical Galani gesture of gratitude, then looked up at him again. "I will come to your ship in 4 hours for a dinner. Then we can talk about our shared future." Sola stood there like a statue, and Helmeni and her entourage passed him in his own. Sola heard Helmeni say to her adjutant, "It is what it is, Shoni. I hope you're not offended. Mistress Archon, I don't mind surviving. It's the best solution for everyone involved," said her adjutant. Then the Galani delegation disappeared. Only the faint sound of their footsteps could be heard. Sola was still standing there flabbergasted. Old Admiral Dovak approached. "I don't know what you did. I am not well versed enough in Galani etiquette, but congratulations on your romantic dinner date with your rival. Some will criticize it as fraternizing with the enemy, others will call it a strategy to build a bridge of compassion, love, and forgiveness towards a former enemy. A bold strategy, if I may say so." Dovak smiled proudly, like a father whose son had successfully asked the school's most beautiful girl to the ball. Sola slowly emerged from his inner paralysis. He had done everything right, hadn't he? Eye contact, get closer, tense muscles, hold the gaze, show teeth, the typical Galani intimidation ritual. He returned to the dock without betraying any emotion to his whispering entourage, who seemed to be amused and excited about what had happened. On the way back, he met Chief Admiral Vorin, who intercepted him at the dock with some officers. Vorin indeed looked quite lively and invited him to stay aboard the Resolute Defender, which Sola politely declined. All his belongings were on the heavy cruiser Mudra, and apparently he had a day unbeknownst to him at the time. That would soon become the topic of the Federation's tabloid press and social media. The Resolute Defender would join Sola's fleet, and just to be sure no foul play had occurred, medical teams would come aboard to examine him and the crew, which Vorin accepted without reservation. Aboard the Mudra, Sola used AI assistants to write a message to his office back on his home planet, announcing the ceasefire and hinting at a possible peace treaty soon. Then he showered and laid down for a nap. Whatever was going to happen, he needed a clear head for when Helmini arrived. Before falling asleep, he asked his AI assistant about Galani customs to understand what had gone wrong. And soon he came to the conclusion. He had forgotten to show his teeth. A subtle difference that had transformed dominance into romantic courting. His little faux pas was about to dramatically affect his whole life. He had proposed to Helmini, and the Galani for sure didn't need a candlelight dinner for a valid proposal. Doing it in the middle of a corridor was completely fine. He heard himself mumble, "Oh my God." Then he fell asleep. The intercom went off, and Sola, who looked over at the chef who had arranged the table in his quarters and prepared dinner, pressed the button. "Yes, please, Prime Minister. A Galani shuttle with Archon Helmini on board is requesting docking clearance. Granted, receive the Archon without any grand ceremony and bring her directly to my quarters." "Understood." Sola looked at the chef who was arranging the final details. "Is everything prepared as discussed?" "Yes, Prime Minister. No food or drink on the table that would be harmful or unpleasant to the Galani." "Thank you. You may go now." The chef left Sola's quarters. Sola had been tempted to put tubatara on the table to scare off Helmini, a delicacy of the Audrel that supposedly smelled to the Galani like a mixture of corpses and sweaty feet, but had decided against it. He had used the time to learn the reception ritual for a marriage candidate. Sola still shuddered whenever he used the word, and to check whether he could cancel the marriage without ending up in an honor duel to the death with Helmini or her father. But something else preoccupied Sola. Why had Helmini spoken of him showing compassion or saving her life through this marriage? Or, as the Galani would call it, life partnership. That troubled Sola, and he wanted to get to the bottom of it. The doorbell rang. Sola got up and opened the door. Standing there were Admiral Dovak, 2 honor guards, and Archon Helmini, who had surprisingly come alone. Dovak stepped aside, and Helmini walked toward him. Sola was momentarily breathless. Her dark gray dress with green accents, which perfectly matched her skin tone, was indeed tasteful and sexy. She showed enough skin to appear attractive, but not so much as to devalue her allure. Sola liked it very much, but at the same time felt guilty. Helmini had dressed up like this because of a misunderstanding. "Good evening, Prime Minister Sola. May I come in?" Sola stepped aside and, with a gesture, invited her in without a word. Dovak saluted and couldn't suppress a smug smile. Sola simply nodded and followed Helmini into his quarters. She had only taken 2 or 3 steps into the room and then stopped. Sola knew why. He had to formally confirm her as family. He walked around Helmini and stood in front of her. He stretched out his hands invitingly, and Helmini placed hers in his. "Welcome to my home, Helmini. For today, let us be family, and let our hearts be open to one another. I accept." Helmini leaned slightly forward without changing her expression and turned her head to the side. Sola, though embarrassed, moved his head closer and sniffed her neck twice. Why are the Galani so obsessed with scent? He thought. Inside, he wanted to die from embarrassment, but he couldn't show it. After he had smelled her jeans, the ritual was completed. Or so Sola thought, but when he tried to withdraw his hands, Helmini held them tightly. She looked into his eyes. Her face remained stony, but her gaze didn't seem hostile. "Sola, I'd like to ask you something. Can we speak honestly tonight, without Odrel tricks?" "Without Odrel tricks and without Galani, who's got the biggest balls?" Sola asked cautiously. Helmini lowered her gaze for a moment and then looked back at him. "That can be arranged, though I'm still a child of my homeland." "Agreed." Helmini seemed to relax considerably, and her expression softened instantly. "I am very grateful for your invitation and for your courtship. But I've thought about it and realized that a relationship between us would be very difficult. ... double quotes. Helmini paused, and Sola couldn't help but say something. "I'm glad you see it that way too. Maybe it's best. That's why we will have to work very hard to make our life partnership a success," Helmini said, and looked him in the eyes not with challenge, but in search of Sola's true feelings. "That is ... I don't know." Sola didn't know what to say though. He was otherwise never helpless when it came to women. Helmini noticed he wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. "How about we sit down and eat something together? Maybe then you'll find the right words to express your thoughts." Sola led Helmini to the nicely arranged table and helped her into the chair in the manner of his people. She had apparently also read up on Audro culture and managed to respond correctly, albeit a bit awkwardly. Sola sat down and removed the lid from the pot containing the main dish. Helmini eyed the pot suspiciously. "No Tobatara. I was half expecting Ita's revenge for the war, or something." Sola took a serving spoon and began placing some of the dumpling dish he had prepared onto Helmini's plate. "I actually wanted to make Tobatara too drive you away, so you'd understand." Sola broke off mid-sentence. "Understand what?" Helmini asked, tilting her head and looking at him intensely. Sola hesitated. Helmini broke eye contact and reached for her glass of water. Sola gathered his courage. On the empty ark, when I stood before you, I just forgot to show my teeth. Helmini, who had just taken a sip of water, burst out laughing and choked, some of the water, unladylike, splashing onto the table. But I asked you if you were serious, she said, laughing and coughing at the same time. I was serious about paying you back for your bitchy behavior, Helmini laughed. So I put on this dress and the ... special underwear ... for nothing. She added quietly, eyes lowered. What a humiliation. Then the fierce Galani in her seemed to awaken again, and half laughing, half defiant, she snapped at him. How can a prime minister be such a failure at Galani rituals? How can a man propose marriage when he's trying to dominate? Sola had to chuckle. I'm the cultural failure. When I pushed your chair in, you stuck your butt out so obscenely, my grandfather, if he were here, would warned me not to marry such a vulgar woman. Prime Minister looks at innocent Galani Archons, but this has to be on every rainbow tabloid in the Federation tomorrow. And as compensation, we demand at least 50 years of chairmanship in the G. They both laughed and then it became quiet. Sola leaned back and studied Helmini. Somehow, she was so different here than in public. You are so much different here than when you are in public. I have seen hints of you not just being a military woman, but I never expected to be able to laugh and talk with you like this. We are alone, and we have declared each other family. It is normal for Galani to just be themselves around family. If I would have to do the tough Archon act even among family, then how could my mind not break without any rest? Without any ... kindness. Helmini finished and appeared to lean back, thinking or remembering something. In a calm, gentle voice, he pulled her out of her thoughts. Helmini, she looked up. I don't know if I'm going crazy from overwork, but I'd like to keep talking with you ... about us. There is no us. It was just a classic cultural misunderstanding. A mistake you made because you were exhausted and annoyed by Galani culture. I'm not so sure anymore. Not now, considering the peace agreement and the to-be-expected cooperation between our species and empires. I think there is practical benefit in our union. Through you I can gain access to Galani leadership through unofficial means. Though practical and political reasons might not be enough ... I need to know more. After a pause, he added softly, what did you see when you looked into Sarah's eyes? Helmini evaded the question and looked at the pot of steaming dumplings. It's getting cold. Sola heaped more dumplings onto her plate and added vegetables and sauce. Then he handed her the plate. As she accepted it, he looked into her eyes. She was afraid. The progenitors are truly terrifying. He invited her to express her feelings. But I noticed that they might prefer to imply power and violence more than actually use them. They're a toothless Buddha. Helmini sounded surprised. I'm not saying they wouldn't use violence, but I think their real source of power isn't their technology, it's their reputation. It's a paradox. Because they're powerful, we assume they'll use that power if we force them to, and therefore, they don't need to use it. At least that's what I think I've seen. Sola had retreated into political and, maybe even philosophical analysis to give space to Helmini's fear. I looked into her eyes and ... double quotes. Helmini paused. I saw her absolute power, and then I clearly felt something behind that power. Behind the power was warmth, love, so strong that it touched me. The intensity of her love frightened me, and at the same time made me happy. Like an ancient memory coming alive. Sarah flew into the observatory. It had a diameter of at least 1 kilometer. When you entered, it felt like floating through the darkness of space. A dark room illuminated by miniature stars and star systems. Nebulae and the glowing dust rings of black holes were visible. In this case, however, it wasn't just celestial bodies. If you wanted, you could focus on a specific part of the galaxy, and the observatory would zoom in. You could see ships, cities, on planets, down to the resolution allowed by the hidden satellite network in hyperspace. Sarah moved forward. Small drones belonging to the ship's AI, Mina, floated around, cataloging and analyzing planets and empires. Even a mind as powerful as that of a progenitor could not possibly grasp all the details the observatory displayed. Sarah approached the center of the map. Thomas was there, and Mina hovered beside him in the form of her larger main drone. Mina's primary drone was a gray Taurus with a glowing blue eye in the front. Thomas hovered there in the true form of a human, a glowing sphere of bioelectrical and psychic energy. Sarah floated closer. She heard Thomas's thoughts. Hello, my love. Just as Mina echoed. Beloved creator, hello both of you. Tom and Marnie are in bed, and I thought I'd check in on you. In our galaxy any crises or problems? The question was more a joke than serious. They were practically drowning in problems and crises. The young races often sought not enlightenment, but the satisfaction of their fears, desires, and self-imposed excessive needs. Mina answered, we only have 37 negotiation opportunities scheduled for next week. How many will we actually take? Tomas spoke into her mind. As usual, a maximum of 7. But there are some particularly difficult conflicts among them. We'll be lucky if we manage 5. I wish our son Danilo were here. or that our friends hadn't had to leave. The war against the Nalgara is approaching its peak. More reinforcements are arriving from the surrounding galaxies. It was tough in the meantime, but now that the Shulva have mobilized their war arcs and sent massive reinforcements, the conflict will end quickly. Susan and Jordan will return soon. It will take, at most, a few 100,000 years. Then the Nalgara will be defeated. Lately we've seen more and more civilizations reach maximum power. But not enlightenment. The number of wars we fight is increasing, and so is the number of races we're forced to wipe out. Defeating them militarily and sending their remnants into void exile is not genocide. At least not a complete one. It still doesn't feel right. The Nalgara wiped out over 100 races in their galaxy without mercy, and tried to hide it from us before we noticed and mobilized enough of our own to stop them. It is not weakness, nor a moral failure, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. But doesn't the rising number of races like the Nalgara suggest that our plan to seed the universe with life isn't working as we hoped? Maybe the seeding strategy itself is a moral failure. We are not gods. We don't always end up being right, which is exactly why we must question whether the seeding strategy is truly the right path. The majority consensus is still in favor of seeding. 93% in the last vote. A million years ago, it was still 95%. Anything over 80% is consensus. Guess I'm not part of the consensus, Sarah stated dryly. Filling the universe only with humans was dismissed by the ancients as egocentric, and while there are more races like the Nalgara, there are also more like the Shulva or Berki, who reach maximum power and enlightenment and share our honorable goals. I know, I just can't shake the feeling that we may have overreached. After a pause, Sarah added, maybe I'm just worried about Tom and Marnie. In 10 to 20 years, we'll have to leave them on the target planet. What if their descendants become like the Nalgara and someday go out and try to destroy others, and then we come back and kill our own grandchildren? What would have been the point of raising Tom and Marnie? You know I agree with you on many things. We've raised too many races, or rather, the ancient humans were a bit too optimistic with their "they will find the right path even if we don't hold their hands" mindset. They admit that themselves now. Then let's push for change in the next vote. We need to slow the seeding process. Thomas was uncertain. There were reasons for fast seeding too, such as ensuring races developed together without too large a technological gap. Slower seeding would increase power disparities between the younger races. I'll think about it, my love, Thomas chuckled. Soon you'll turn me into an anti-seeder too. If I don't, then the workload will devour you. When was the last time we did? I miss your warmth and your love. Mina chimed in. If dear Thomas would finally agree to my proposal to bring the Berki into this galaxy to help, then we could better care for the young races and you would have more time for each other. What's stopping you? I worry that the races are too young to understand that while humans are the first and true progenitors, some of our children have now begun to reach our level and have attained ancestor status through enlightenment and power. The Berki are exceptionally skilled diplomats. With their help, we could improve our seeding efforts here. You two agree, ... double quotes, he paused. Mina, extend feelers to the Berki collective. Request the long-term deployment of an Archeer to assist in raising the younger races. Gladly. And the two of us, let's fly home. We need to finally share soul communion again. Sarah giggled. It sounds so obscene when you say it like that. You love my no-nonsense personality. That's why you married me over 4 billion years ago. As they floated home side by side, they didn't talk about problems but about successes. Did you know the Galani girl and the Audril Prime Minister got married? Now that the peace treaty was signed on both sides, her family fell from a top 100 status to near pariah within a week, and then skyrocketed into the top 10 of the hierarchy. What a roller coaster ride. And reporters asked the Prime Minister more about his Galani wife than about the treaty. He's working non-stop to keep both the opposition and the tabloid press in check. I truly hope for a peaceful future of these species. That's a development even we couldn't have foreseen. I hope the two of them become a symbol for what Galani and Audril can achieve together. Should we gift them a genetic The Galani still have the one we placed on their homeworld from back then, when we placed Gal and Nani on there during this galaxy's second wave of seedings. They'll get access to it. You see, there are many problems, but it's not all bad. It's not all bad, as long as we have each other. They reached the house and floated through it. They checked on Tom and Marnie, who slept peacefully in their beds, unaware of what the future held for them. They entered the parental bedroom. There was no bed, only two soft cushions on the ground, placed across from one another. They let their round bodies sink onto them and began the merging. Slowly and gently at first, then, with growing intensity and completeness, their minds merged. They shared their fears, worries, hopes, dreams and, most importantly, their love. They were not gods. But they were true lovers.